Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, and today I'm going to be going over exactly what to expect and what to do in the technology consulting case interview, as so many people have asked me that they don't know exactly what to expect because there are not a lot of resources on there. Make sure to check my video over here on exactly what is a technology consulting case interview, what makes it different from a management consulting case interview, how to prepare for it, and what to be aware of. So in this video, we're going to be going over exactly what to do and what you need to do to really actually be successful. And I know it's going to seem pretty subjective because there's still not a lot of frameworks behind it, but there's still a lot of things that you can do to really maximize your potential. And this is based off of my knowledge from either when I actually prepared for it, when I did it, and then when I actually start asking people how their experience was and eventually what they've been looking for. So in this video, I will be telling you about the framework, the approach, some tips on exactly your answer and approach as well. And then at the end of the day, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit more about the technology consulting case interview program that I also have. So make sure to check that out and stay until the end, which by the way, it's free. So here you can see, this is the framework. And in this framework, you're going to see that there is a huge hierarchy, which first starting with priorities and goals, consulting firm, and client considerations. What a lot of people forget is that when it comes to technology consulting case interview is that you're technically helping out with a client. And the main difference, like I mentioned before in the video over here, is that there's a main difference in terms of, first, there's a focus on technology, and second, there is a focus on practicality, because no matter what, when it comes to technology, it's a little bit focused on delivery than it is on theory. So you want to make sure that you have a lot of risk factors mentioned and contingency plans. And as you can see here, first you need to make sure to align your project with the priorities and goals. And if your entire approach and response does not even match up to the priorities and goals, then you're pretty much screwed, because that's why it's at the very top. You need to make sure it matches. And if you don't even answer the main question or problem statement, you're not going to do a really good job as a consultant, because your whole point is to answer the problem. And if you don't even answer the problem, I don't know, they paid you for nothing then. And then the second thing that I have that is not typical, but I like to add it in there because I think this is really key when it comes to the consulting, when it comes to the interview portion of it, is that you want to make sure that you're a good fit. There's a way to actually kind of adjust your approach and response based off of the kind of company you're working with, and I'll give you some tips later on. Then you also have client considerations, which is the key part of the practicality behind it, is that maybe that you're in an insurance industry. How do they actually treat technology? Or maybe they're in healthcare. What are some key factors that you need to be aware of? This is why I mentioned in my how to prepare for your technology consulting case interview is to really read up on industry trends as well. Not just technology, industry trends. So as we kind of pan down to the industry portion, you're gonna see that there are specific things that are gonna be very similar all throughout each of the three on the bottom, but a little bit different. So first off, what are some industry specific problems to consider? And a lot of people don't really realize that based off of the industry, it could be different. So let's say, for example, government and healthcare and insurance, there's always going to be some kind of risk factor of security. So you always need to make sure that with any technology, you have a really strong security and even some kind of government regulations if it's some kind of high tech, which again, we're going to be using it in the technology portion of the tree. And you should really also keep in mind of the adjustments that you may need to make based off of the information in the case. Your response to your case definitely needs to make sure that you're actually following the case, not the problem, the case. So you need to make sure that you're actually following the company and the industry background, and then you need to talk about the problem statement as well. If you can use your answer to any other case relating to AI, then you're not doing a good job. You really need to cater it to the case. So this means that talk about the industry, talk about the company, all those kind of things. And then that leads into talking about the company. In the problem statement, you're going to see over here the company specifically of maybe what are some company specific problems. And this is going to kind of technically come in line with the priorities and goals. Maybe they're focusing on, maybe they have high attrition, which means a lot of people are leaving the company. How can we use technology to leverage that? And you want to also make sure, kind of use your thought process here and again, say it out loud. It's really key to really walk through the entire process out loud so that way your interviewer knows. Maybe, okay, there's high attrition, that means a high turnover rate, which means that if you were to train an entire system to them, what's the point if they're going to leave and then you need to train people again? So maybe you need to provide some documentation on training, or maybe provide some kind of reason to make it seamless for when there's like onboarding and offboarding. And also make sure maybe if you could use technology to really prevent attrition from happening. There's a lot of ways you can do that. Just definitely think creatively. Here's the things that I mentioned over here is who are the stakeholders and what are the decisions that need to be made. And a lot of people don't really keep this in mind, especially when it comes to management consulting case interviews. They keep on following the frameworks, and this is really more about the approach. But here again, it's more focused on the practicality. So in this case, well, who is actually making the decision and who needs to be the one that really makes the decision? Maybe if, for example, the entire case was about how do we boost sales, and maybe your approach is how do we boost sales, and maybe it could be through marketing, and then you could use like digital marketing strategies. So who would your stakeholders be here? Or it would be the marketing team. So now what do you actually need to make sure that they have decisions of, or maybe that they're capable of? You always make sure that they're capable of doing it. And we need to remind you that in a case interview, you always need to make sure that you can ask follow-up questions. You don't need to know everything. Okay, this is the whole point of the case interview, is that you're not supposed to know everything. They want to see how you are with the lack of information. And this is also where you need to ask follow-up questions to maybe even confirm some of your assumptions. And if you have any assumptions at all, make sure to talk about them, because you want to make sure that they understand your thought process and that it's not just like kind of coming out of nowhere. You want to provide an assumption and then maybe ask them to confirm it as well. So that way, if like maybe it's completely off, then you can at least confirm it before you move forward, and then you go on a completely different tangent. Maybe the stakeholders is the marketing team. Then what? Then you go to make sure like, okay, so I need to make sure that every decision that I'm thinking of right now needs to go through the marketing team. The other thing could be like maybe you're trying to kind of consolidate all these data centers, and now you need to work about like, okay, all these different systems out there, who do we need to talk about? Probably the head of the IT team, or maybe like all these systems. Like if you're at a hospital, you're working with a system, you need to make sure that you also have hospital administration on your side, because this also means that you're really trying to change the process up. And then when it comes to technology, you have time, money, scope, which is a typical project management kind of approach. But especially when it comes to case interview, like you always need to know that you're within limits. You need to know, okay, well, how much time do we have? And if you do see that this project is huge, but then you look at maybe it's a small company, then how do you really think that they have the time and money and resources to do all of this? Probably not. So you need to make sure, well, because if they want to do this, maybe it's a very urgent project. And again, make sure to ask the interviewer is very urgent, or maybe it's stated in the case. Maybe it's like, for example, that there is a competitor and then they're trying to kind of beat them out based off of technology that they have provided, or maybe to optimize their processes. Make sure to double check that, because if there's a competitor, it's probably going to be a little bit more urgent. They can't wait 2 years to make sure to beat this competitor out. So you need to make sure like, okay, well, what do we need to kind of give out, and what can we kind of binge on? If they have a lot of resources, then it's great. But if you have a lot of time and then a lot of resources, that's perfect as well. But then maybe something in scope goes in hand. And again, you always need to make sure on the practicality of it that, for example, in a project where you may have like only 1 year to do, and then the kind of the scale of the recommendation you're given may not fit that timeline, then you kind of need to scale it back, and you kind of need to give like, what is the minimum viable product? And you can kind of like check off all the boxes, even though it may not be as great, but you can always still kind of use like kind of after work support after that as well to kind of add those enhancements. And then here is where I think a lot of people struggle, and the main difference when it comes to management and technology consulting case interviews is actually the knowledge of technology. You need to understand the pros and cons, what exactly is the technology, why would you recommend it, how would you do it, and almost everything that you have in mind. So my tip to you is definitely try to hone in a lot of main key concepts of a lot of main key tech. You're not expected to know everything, but at least have a lot of them in your head already prepared. So that way you have a solid kind of toolkit to kind of use. Maybe you know something about cloud, and then you really know about cloud. And then maybe you know about something about AI, and you really know about what goes on AI and all the kind of tools that you need to kind of use AI in your case. Maybe you know something about mobile applications, like what exactly, you need to know everything about each of the things that you're going to talk about. And then when you go into the case interview, you can at least kind of use them. Sometimes in the cases, they're going to mention specifically actual technology that you need to know. And then some of them are just gonna ask like a general broad question about like, what would you recommend and how would you do it? And then that's where you can pull something out of your toolkit that you already know. So out of all of these, the things that you really can see a trend here is that you always need to provide a contingency plan for the risks. And this is really key, because a lot of people, they come to me and say, oh, Christine, like, why is it that I didn't get the offer? And most likely they just gave that response and the approach, but they didn't actually go more on the practicality and the risk factors and contingency plans, because it's a little bit focused more on delivery here. How can you really really ensure that the project is going to be a success. Maybe there's a current issue in the industry right now. Can you provide a plan for that? Maybe in healthcare, they're focused on security. How can you actually make sure that security is kind of addressed? Maybe they're focused on the company. Maybe there's a company trying to buy them out. How can we make sure that this is seamless as possible? And then maybe this contingency plan can really help that as well. And then you have the technology. Let's provide self-driving cars as an example. What if that all of a sudden the government now deems them as illegal, or there's a lot of regulations? Now what are you going to do? What are some solutions that you can do to basically address the same priorities and goals and also solve the problem? Because at the end of the day, if you don't solve the problem, you just keep on going off of this and it doesn't actually solve the problem. You really need to, this is why I recommend you to, before you even start your case or you have the interview in front of you, take a few minutes to actually try to kind of see and understand the case and take notes, maybe underline, circle things, all the kind of things that you can do. And then here, so this is the framework that I have in mind, and this also kind of goes along with people, process, and technology. This seems really similar actually. Just something about people as the client considerations, and then think about process as all the contingency plans and pros and cons and why and how. Then when it comes to technology as well, there's a whole section on technology here. So really try to follow this framework because I think this is really key. And then now I'm going to go into the consulting firm. Maybe, for example, let's say that Accenture really values in creativity, so they want to see how innovative and how creative your response is. Or maybe when it comes to like a big four, they want to see, are you a good fit for the culture? So this could mean like leveraging the big company resources out there, and that would be a really great way to kind of tie it all in. Now I'm going to talk about the approach for the technology consulting case interview. First off, like I mentioned before, to definitely take a step back, take all the notes, really try to digest the case that you're going to get. And then once you get that, make sure like you actually have everything in mind, you know your approach. Start to understand the issue and ask clarifying questions as needed. So this means that maybe if there's some kind of misunderstanding or it's unclear or not a lot of information in a particular area, you're expected to be asking these clarifying questions. You're never going to know the full answer. You're never going to know the full background, and that's exactly how it's going to be when it comes to consulting. You're always going to be trying to kind of dig through from the client, find that information that you need, synthesize it, and then provide an approach and recommendation. Next is that you also need to make sure to mention the assumptions that you're going to make. Don't assume that your interview can understand everything that you're saying. And the whole purpose, again, let's remind you that for this interview, it's really to understand your thought process and your understanding on the subject. So in this case, if you understand the assumptions and you mention them, they can understand that, okay, you have an idea of what to expect, and they kind of see your logical progression. If they just see it all randomly, that's just like popping up right here, then you're like, where did that come from? Like, are you just kind of pulling this out of nowhere? You need to provide your assumptions and kind of tell the why you came to that conclusion. Then you need to summarize your issues and findings, and this is what you need to do to kind of synthesize the actual case, and then also bring out some kind of your common knowledge and some of the knowledge of the technology behind it. So if you have all this information, mention exactly what are the key factors of the actual problem statement, and mention specifically what are some things that you're going to recommend as well based off of some findings. So this is where maybe you have some data and facts behind everything, like what is cloud? Well, you can also need to make sure that they're a client, so they may not even know what cloud is, even though your interviewer is a technology consultant. So talk about them about what cloud is, what are the pros and cons, why would you recommend it in this particular situation as opposed to any other situation, and back it up with information from the actual case, or maybe some of the assumptions that you made, or some follow-up questions that you've asked. Then you want to make sure to clarify all of the recommendations that you make, kind of state it everything again, so that way you kind of mention why. And then for each of these recommendations, mention why you specifically said what you said, how you're going to do it, and again, when you say how, I want you to walk through all the steps on how to approach it, and then mention some contingency plans and risks that you see from that particular plan. So let's say, for example, for cloud, what if the system is down? Now what? You always need to make sure to provide some manual processes as well, just kind of like a backup. You never know. And then the other thing is that, let's say, for example, there's high attrition, like I mentioned before, and there's a lot of people that are leaving the company. Then there's a whole new system that they may need to learn. So there's a few things you could do. First, number one, you hire people that have experience on the software if they're like a main user of the actual software. And then number two is maybe to provide actual documentation on training. So that way, when people use it, they actually know how to use it as well, and also train other people as well. Because once a consulting firm leaves, it's pretty much done unless you provide more after work. But in this case, just try to assume that you're going to be leaving them after this project. So this kind of last part is actually really crucial because this is the part where a lot of people lack. And when you join the technology consulting case program that I have, you're going to see that there's a huge clear difference between a good and a great answer. So let's say, like, for example, we want to focus on cloud and you want to kind of consolidate all these centers together and use a cloud software like, let's say, Salesforce. And then with Salesforce, you can say that there's a lot of good reporting tools that you can really use, and they're really user friendly, so that way anyone that can come in can kind of understand, but of course always provide some training materials and resources as well, just in case they can't. You never know their background, you can't always assume everything. And then now what's the great response is that, oh well, based off of this, we recommend this approach in terms of like providing some discovery sessions and really trying to see all the things that you need to do. You don't need to have everything. If you really had everything, this is basically go back to the technology portion of time, scope, and money. And you need to make sure that you really cover all the requirements. You don't necessarily need to follow all of the requirements, just those that are required. That way you can have a better client relationship and also be able to use all your resources better. Then you also need to mention what are some kind of things you also keep in mind with. So maybe it's like subscription based now, then this is something you need to keep in mind of. So this is really good because you're basically completely in mind of exactly what to expect and what to actually recommend to the client as well, and what they need to expect, because after you leave, they're pretty much set on their own. So this is the framework that I recommend. This is the approach that I recommend. So make sure to really learn about them. And if you really want to put them into the test, which honestly, you can really study all of this and you may not even know anything at all, you really need to practice them. And this is why I have the technology consulting community, where I created a technology consulting case practice program. Oh my gosh, such a wordy term, but basically a program where I match you up with someone of either similar interests, same time zone, and kind of skill set as well, so that way you guys would be good buddies. You do video calls, so that way you can kind of see all the body language as well and make sure that it's going to be like a real video call, compared to like if you did it to the wall or you did it to yourself. You're not going to be the best person to kind of answer for yourself. And then this entire time, we're also going to be providing you free practice cases, free frameworks. All the frameworks that I mentioned today are going to be in that program as well. And then a rubric as well to really kind of show you exactly what you need to work on, what to be aware of, because a lot of times from what I'm seeing here is that it's really hard to kind of see what you're doing and what you need to do well in, because if you don't do well in something and then you're kind of grading yourself, or maybe you have someone else doing it, it may be a little bit harder, because technology consulting case interviews look for something different than management consulting case interviews, and I feel like because due to the lack of resources, you may not even know what they're expecting. Last of all, I want to mention that it's free. If you join the Facebook group, it's completely free. It's a Facebook group, and it's really just to be with a lot of other aspiring and current technology consultants. And then eventually we're also gonna have the program as well, but you can also use the Facebook group to kind of like ask questions. There's also a lot of current technology consultants out there, so there's gonna be a lot of industry expertise. Or maybe if you want to see the difference between like one consulting firm over the other, really kind of battle them out. Maybe you have two offers and you'll kind of see what's the difference, and maybe you want to reach out to professionals out there, maybe know more about each of the firms. So without further ado, thank you so much. And if you have any other questions about the case interview process, make sure to comment down below, but also make sure to join the Facebook group down in the description box below, and I will have a lot of resources there for this program. So like I mentioned before, there's not a lot of resources online, but I'm providing it for you free in that Facebook group and this program as well. I'll be matching you up, so this is something that you can be doing. So even if you don't get a good match, I can always match you up with someone else. And this is honestly really great, because this means that even if you are watching this video like months later, I will still be matching you up and you'll still have a lot of practice. So I think this is a really great way to network and also learn about the companies, but also if you have any questions and you want to network and have a buddy, you have the person that you're going to be interviewing with. So thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye.